All right, let's get started with the first things you'll need as a beginner photographer, the essentials. And these things are gonna be the absolute bare minimum that you'll need to start taking photos. Number one, a camera. This one's pretty obvious. And for your first camera, you should look to pay anywhere from $0 or free all the way up to around $750. That's the range that most of your beginner cameras are gonna fall in. Number two, a lens. And if you're completely new to photography and have no idea what to look for in a lens, I recommend getting the kit lens. And normally you can get the kit lens with whatever camera you buy as a bundle. They're normally pretty cheap and you can expect focal ranges from 18 to 55 millimeters, 24 to 70 millimeters, or 55 to 200 millimeters. Those are the typical focal lengths for kit lenses. And for your first lens, you want to try and stay under at least $350. Number three, a battery. And you'll most likely want a few batteries. Somewhere around 3 or 4 is usually pretty good, but just one battery for starting out is perfectly fine. Number four, a battery charger. Whenever your camera runs out of juice, you're gonna need a way to charge it. And most of the time you should get both a battery and a battery charger with the camera that you buy. Unless you buy a used camera, in that case you want to read the description because they don't always include batteries or battery chargers with the camera. Also, just a little piece of advice, don't buy third-party batteries. I've bought a handful of third-party batteries in the past and they all crapped out on me. They never charged up all the way and they die really quickly too. So just steer clear of third-party batteries, just go for the name brand. They might cost a pretty penny, but they're gonna be worth it in the end. And number five, an SD card. I recommend going with SanDisk because they're always reliable. And at the very least, you'll probably want a 128 gigabyte SD card. And just like with your batteries, you'll most likely want a few SD cards. About 2 or 3 is what you'll want, but 1 for now is fine. And that's about all you need just to get started taking photos. But just to recap, we had a camera, anywhere from $0 to $750, a lens, anywhere from $0 up to $350 or $500, a battery and battery charger, which should both come with your camera if you buy a new one, and an SD card, which should run around $30. Now again, these are the essentials, the bare minimum that you'll need to start taking photos. And just so you know, I'll have all my recommendations for the first 5 essential pieces of gear I just listed off in the description below. But if you want to do anything further than just taking photos, for example, if you want to transfer your photos from your SD card on your camera to a safer hard drive, or if you want to just edit your photos, then you're going to need a few extra pieces of gear. And that leads me into our second category for camera gear that beginner photographers need: an image editing / viewing device. And these can come in a few different forms. First, which is probably the most obvious, your standard desktop computer. And I don't want to go too deep into computer specifics because that's not my expertise, but here's a few things you should look for. At least 8 gigabytes of RAM, but preferably 16, an i5 or newer processor, and then you'll most likely want a minimum of 512 gigabytes of internal storage on the computer, but you might be able to get away with 256 gigabytes. Aside from a desktop computer, you can also use a laptop, an iPad, or even your smartphone. However, out of all these options, I recommend going with a desktop or a laptop. Just because right now you have more capabilities with these two options rather than an iPad or a smartphone. You have a larger display, making it easier to view and edit your photos. It also makes it easier to transfer your images from your SD card to an external hard drive. And in my opinion, the photo editing software you have available from a laptop and desktop compared to an iPad or smartphone is much better. However, there's still some great applications out there for editing photos on your smartphone as well. But anyways, as far as price goes with one of these options, if you can stay under the $750 mark, I'd say you're looking pretty good. So from here, we have all the essentials to start taking photos. We have a device to view the photos on, but now we need a place to edit the photos and to store the photos long term. And that leads us into category number 3, digital storage. And as a photographer, there's 2 types of digital storage you're gonna want. And they are an SSD and an HDD. Now an SSD stands for solid state drive, and this is the hard drive that you'll edit your photos on. These are normally smaller hard drives and they don't contain a physical disk inside them that's spinning in order for them to operate. And for an SSD, 500 gigabytes of storage space for a photographer should be more than enough. Now when comparing the price of an SSD to an HDD, the SSD is gonna run a little bit more. However, don't skimp on buying an SSD and instead just buy 2 HDDs. That's not what you wanna do. SSDs are better to edit your photos on rather than HDDs because SSDs are less likely to fail and corrupt your files. Now HDDs, you don't wanna edit your photos on these. These are gonna be used for long-term storage instead. So what your workflow should look like is you should edit your photos on the SSD, and then when you're done, transfer them to the HDD. The HDD should not be used as an editing drive. Like I said, these should be used for mass and long-term storage. Also, if I didn't mention it, HDD stands for hard disk drive. So inside of these, there is a physical disk spinning when they're operating, which is why they are more likely to fail than SSDs. Because if you drop the HDD or the disk inside gets damaged in any way, then you might lose some files. Which is why many photographers, me included, have 2 HDDs with the same exact files on each one. That way, if one HDD fails, you have a backup of the same exact files. This is called redundant file management, and I recommend it to every single photographer out there. All right, I kind of went off on a tangent there. Let's get back on track. Now, I'm not sure how much the average SSD and HDD cost. I haven't had to buy them in a while. But again, my recommendations for SSDs and HDDs are gonna be in the description below. Also, here's how much my current SSD costs, and here's how much my current HDD costs. Hopefully that gives you somewhat of an idea of a price to look for. Okay, so at this point, we have a lot of physical camera gear. We have a camera, we have a lens, we have probably a few SD cards and batteries. We have maybe 2 or 3 hard drives and maybe a laptop or tablet. But lugging around all this equipment is gonna be very difficult to do if you don't have some form of dedicated camera gear storage or transportation. So the next thing you're gonna wanna look into is a camera bag. And for this, I have 2 recommendations. If you want just a small camera bag, I recommend the LowePro Tahoe BP 150. And I've done a few reviews about this camera bag. You can check that out above in the card. However, maybe you have a little bit more equipment and need something larger. Well, for this, I recommend the ThinkTank Backstory 15. And I did a review about this camera bag as well. Check it out above in the card. Also, for a beginner camera bag, I wouldn't spend any more than 250 bucks. Anything above that is gonna be overkill. So now we almost have what I think is the complete setup for beginner photographers. We're just missing one last simple yet crucial piece of camera gear that will make taking photos so much easier. And that's category number 5, stabilization. Now there's a few forms of stabilization out there available to photographers, but I think the main ones are a monopod, a mini tripod, and a regular size tripod. I guess technically you could say a mini tripod and a tripod are the same thing. But I would say they do have mini tripods out there, such as SwitchPod or GorillaPods. However, I wouldn't recommend these to start out. Personally, I'd recommend just getting a standard tripod. For example, the tripod that I have used for the last 4 or 5 years is the Sunpack Travel-Lite Pro. And if you want to check out that tripod, I did a review video about that as well. Check the card. Also, I want to say this tripod cost me around 70 bucks, but a good budget for a beginner tripod, I would say, is anywhere from 100 up to 150 bucks. Normally anything below 100 bucks is pretty bad. But as long as you get a nice sturdy tripod that has a high enough max weight capacity to support your camera and lens, then you shouldn't have anything to worry about. Okay, so from the essentials all the way down to the stabilization, you should have a pretty nice set of camera gear to get you going. However, I do think there's a few extras that are not essentials that can really transform your photography. And here they are. First of all, you'll probably want to look into some sort of photo editing software. I highly recommend getting into Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop. Those are just the 2 most widely used softwares in the world of photography. The only downside is that you actually have to pay a monthly subscription to get access to that software. However, it only comes out to 10 bucks a month, so it's not too bad. But if you want to check out some free photo editing software, there's a website called Canva, and that's like the free version of Photoshop. And then there's another one called Darktable. I don't know if this is a website or a software that you actually download onto your computer, but I have heard good things about it. And that one's free as well. On top of photo editing software, another good thing to look into are photography books or photography training. And there's actually 2 books I would recommend to beginner photographers. The first one being Digital SLR Cameras and Photography for Dummies. It sounds a little insulting, but there's actually a lot of good information inside this book for beginners. And then the second one would be Zen Camera by David Ulrich, or Ulrich, one of the 2. This book is like an overview of photography and basically teaches you the fundamentals. Whereas this book is more of a deep dive into photography and makes you really think about the images that you're taking. But yeah, I recommend getting actually both of these books. But if you're not really a book person, you could probably check out Skillshare and find some photography courses on there. All right, now for the last thing on my entire list, a second lens. Now, if you bought the kit lens, like I stated at the beginning of this video, the next lens you'll probably want to look into is a cheap prime lens. And usually the lens that most people look at when they're looking for a good, cheap prime lens is the nifty 50, or in other words, a 50mm f1.8. And you can normally find this lens made by basically any brand, and they usually run around $100. However, there's one actually made by Yongnuo, I think that's how you say it, and it's a 50mm f1.8, the nifty 50, and I think they have it priced at $50, if I'm not mistaken. However, if you think 50mm is going to be too tight of a focal length, then I recommend checking out the Yongnuo, again, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, 35mm f2. Those are both going to be pretty good options. So that's my A to Z list of everything you should need as a beginner photographer. This is plenty of gear to get you started in the world of photography. You really shouldn't need anything more unless you're doing something very specific. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did and you want to see more videos just like this one, subscribe to the channel by clicking right here. Thanks for watching, and always remember to capture great moments. Peace.